Of course not. 6'6". What? What? Okay. But thanks for coming today. I didn't see Josh. Is Josh Blessing in the audience? You remember? Or he's not. You know who Josh is from the Bucks. We're fortunate to be together today at Marquette University. Education has always been foundational to the strength of our community. But today, the conversation around education funding is about more than budgets or policy decisions. It's about opportunity, the future competitiveness of our region. The choices we make around education funding shape what is possible for our young people, families, employers, and for Milwaukee as a whole. When students have access to strong schools, quality programming, and the support they need to succeed, the benefits extend far beyond the classroom. We see stronger neighborhoods, healthier local economies, businesses with deeper talent pipelines. Ultimately, we see more young people choosing to build their future right here in Milwaukee. At the same time, we know the challenges are real. Families, educators, business leaders, and community organizations, we're all navigating what these shifts mean and what comes next. That's why today's discussion matters. To share more about their work, please welcome Andrew Dwyer, Dean of the College of Business Administration, and Dr. Debbie Tomasavi. Right? Close? There you go. Tomasavi. And I practiced that. That is so bad. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
I told them not to overthink it. Once you start getting it in your head, it's way complicated. It's long and it looks scary, but it's tenacity. And I would like to just welcome everybody on behalf of Marquette University. I'm Debbie Tomasavi, and I'm the provost here. And I just want to express the welcome on behalf of President Kimo Ayun, who is very sorry that he is out of town and couldn't be here with everybody. He really wanted to. I know we thought about bringing a cutout of him, but we decided not to, but we should have. I'm really excited that you're on campus with us here today. And just from hearing the introduction, thank you. There's a lot of overlapping interests. It was great to hear what you were saying, like, yes, check, that makes a lot of sense, right? The kinds of things that you're thinking about, and I know we'll be talking about today what Marquette does as well. Also, I'm new to Milwaukee, so it's always exciting for me to hear about people who are focusing in on what brings you here, right? And the future of Milwaukee, the integration between those who are thinking about education and thinking about what makes life work in the city and keeping people happy, because that's a big part of definitely why I moved here. So that's my ask to you. If you see me around, tell me your favorite thing to do here, because it's only been a few months. I'm not from the Midwest at all. It's all very new. So I'm open to all exciting ideas that you have for me. I love the goal to make Milwaukee the best place to live, learn, work, play, and stay. Right? I know your focus is a lot. I love those words. And I know your focus is a lot on K-12 education, emphasis on lifelong learning, but that's, again, where we overlap. But in terms of what is Marquette thinking about, we're, of course, also thinking about thriving students. And there's a large number of our students are increasingly coming from out of state to come to Marquette, and they tend to stay here. So I think that focus on what draws people here and then what keeps them here and how can they thrive is what I think is some of the greatest intersection of the work that we do. So I hope you enjoy your meeting, and thank you.
All right, and so I'm just going to pick it up with a couple pieces. So as Debbie said, this is where people come and stay. We are one of the economic engines of the city. But then the other one that President Ayun often points out is just the role that we play in the community. And this is one that we take a lot of pride in, not just because it's our mission, but because it's the impact that comes with it. And it's the #1 college, or #1 university for most engaged in community service, voted 2 years in a row by the Princeton Review for universities all around the country. And that's the thing that we really try to instill in those students who've come here and joined here, is that community connection and the impact they have. So one of the questions, though, that we kept getting as universities and kind of the values of universities being up for debate in the public sphere. And so got a call because they obviously come to the business school and say, well, what's the financial impact of Marquette on the region? What is it that we do to contribute to so much of what you do? And there were just a couple interesting facts that really jumped out. $100 million that we've been able to spend on local supplies and services, $500 million in construction activity over the last 10 years. And then we've got 100 different congressional districts that we've been able to serve, but also partnerships with over 500 companies within the region. And so really that's the thing that Marquette, and exactly why we're excited to have all of you here, is the connection with the community. Because we see that as just so central to our role of working in partnership with all of you to create and continue to drive a stronger, healthier region. And so these are just some fun facts to take with you. So you always think, oh yeah, Marquette basketball, it's all great. And we like that too. And we are hopeful for the new season. And what role we play in helping you really drive that growth. Along that, seeing a few friends middle of the room, because it's thanks to another friend over here, we've extended the impact of the Northwestern Mutual Data Science Institute and seeing how we do that. Are you now just former chancellor? Is that where you're going by, Mark?
Wonderful life.
President Barhouse and MSOE, MCW, being a hub for AI and data science in the region. And again, that doesn't happen alone. That doesn't happen just with a partnership of educational institutions along with a great corporate partner, but it's how do we bring more into that act, because these are the kinds of things that are going to help drive the prosperity and growth of the region. So with that, I will turn it back over to you. So again, welcome, glad to have you here, and you're always welcome back. This place was made for exactly these kinds of meetings.
So as a proud parent, can you hear me? No. As a proud parent of a Marquette alumni, I feel the need to say we are Marquette. So thank you very much for. Marquette continues to play such an important role in shaping Milwaukee's future through education, leadership, and deep community partnership. And we're grateful to gather here today for this conversation. But before I jump into our programming, I would like to share a few updates on the GMC work. Regarding public safety, our Public Safety Committee met last week and aligned around developing a 100-day community violence intervention action plan. The goal is to move from planning to action by strengthening connections between Milwaukee's violence prevention ecosystem and GMC members for engagement. The initial focus will be workforce development, specifically identifying employment pathways for individuals in at-risk communities. Rather than building something new, we're focused on connecting with organizations already leading this work and identifying meaningful ways for GMC members to support and plug into these existing efforts. Related to our public safety work, youth and young adult engagement work is moving forward, led by GMC member organizations, Children's Wisconsin, and the Greater Milwaukee Urban League. They are focused on an Ambition $1.5 million campaign aimed at connecting at-risk youth and young adults with safe, supportive spaces this summer. Concurrently, the GMC, home group, Boys and Girls Clubs, and other community stakeholders are working on a digital platform to make summer programming easier for families to find and access summer programming, while helping youth serving organizations better coordinate opportunities across the city. With education, we're excited to launch the GMC and MPS Executive Coaching Pilot pairing 18 Milwaukee Public School executives with executive coaches from the GMC member organization. This is a strong example of how GMC members can directly invest leadership and expertise into Milwaukee's education ecosystem. On infrastructure, we're excited to relaunch the Infrastructure and Civic Development Committee. The committee will look broadly at how major civic assets, including cultural institutions, innovation hubs, public spaces, and catalytic development work together to shape Milwaukee's long-term economic vitality and identity. Regarding Fiscal Strength Committee, we are convening this summer to discuss the next step of its work. The committee will continue to support efforts tied to the city's operational review and annual budget planning, while also exploring broader opportunities where GMC can advance Milwaukee's long-term growth and economic strength. We look forward to sharing more about this as this continues to take shape. Recently, we shared that the GMC has partnered with Miller Communications to help strengthen our communications and marketing efforts. This work began with refining our mission, vision, and value propositions, and now moves into the next phase, the development of a new GMC website and broader communication strategies designed to better connect with and inform our members. Please be on the lookout for this rollout over the summer. And lastly, the GMC is now in 3 years of its current strategic plan. And with the combination of the feedback that I've received through the various listening sessions, we thought it might be the right opportunity to do a mini strategic refresh and continue to get your feedback and support. The board of directors will be discussing this at our next board meeting, and we look forward to continuing to gather your information and feedback on our process. Now, I want to provide an update on the Milwaukee Reading Coalition and a call to action. I trust you will all recognize the need. In Milwaukee, nearly 3 out of 4 fourth graders cannot read at a basic level. 2024 National Association Educational Project score showed only 9% of Milwaukee fourth graders scored proficient in reading. City posted the largest decline of scores since 2019. Only Detroit was behind Milwaukee. In May of last year, the GMC was excited to support the Milwaukee Reading Coalition, a new and unique group of cross-sector leaders convened to work on improving literacy for all Milwaukee students. In fact, our speakers today include key members of the Milwaukee Reading Coalition and have made literacy a top priority for MPS. The Milwaukee Reading Coalition worked quickly centered around support for the training of educators and administrators in the science of reading as mandated by Act 20 legislation. The goal has always been to seek state funding, raise private dollars that combined would support citywide public-private partnership. The Milwaukee Reading Coalition, acting in good faith and transparently with DPI, did a lot of work. They secured a fiscal sponsor, finalized the RFP process for schools, raised private dollars, established the Reading Commission, and named 5 expert commissioners and recruited an executive talent to lead the work of the commission. Yet, after more than 1 year of working transparently with DPI, the Milwaukee Reading Coalition encountered contradictory guidance, delay upon delay, and inaction. Mayor Johnson, who's with us today, reached out to DPI Superintendent Underly, seeking clarity and confidence in our work today. Her reply disappointingly indicated that DPI lacked the authority to support the Milwaukee Reading Coalition. Since receiving that reply, the mayor and the Milwaukee Reading Coalition have publicly called upon DPI and the superintendent to acknowledge the Milwaukee Reading Coalition work today and continue to engage with us. You may have received email updates or seen the op-ed the mayor, Dr. Howard Fuller, and our GMC board members, Greg Wesley and Joanne Anton, authored. Now we are asking that the GMC to make its voice heard. On the slide, you will find a QR code to scan for more information on how you can help by telling DPI that Milwaukee children have waited long enough and that they need to work with the Milwaukee Reading Coalition on funding for our initiative. Our community has shown ability and willingness to be a part of the solution, and we have waited far too long. I hope you will all enjoy and join us in advocating for helping to support our children in Milwaukee. I would now like to introduce today's meeting topic, the future of education funding in Milwaukee and the broader implications for our community and regional economy. The Greater Milwaukee Committee has long believed that our region's greatest progress happens when leaders come together across sectors to solve shared challenges. Education funding is no exception. It is no secret that Milwaukee and Wisconsin faces significant education funding challenges. For the GMC, this is not just about identifying challenges, it's also about exploring solutions and understanding the broader implications for our shared future. We need to ask each other how we can work collectively to ensure Milwaukee remains a place where every young person has success to opportunity and every employer has access to the talent needed to grow and thrive. We are joined today by Dr. Brenda Cassellius, Superintendent of Milwaukee Public Schools, who will provide an overview of the current MPS budget, outlining both opportunities and challenges facing public education in our region. After her presentation, we'll take a 10-minute break for you to enjoy your lunch and conversation at your table. We will then be joined by a panel of local education experts who will explore the broader considerations our community must address moving forward, including the financial challenges facing other school sectors in Milwaukee and the long-term impact education funding has on workforce development, public safety, economic competitiveness, and overall community well-being. Today's panel of experts include Rob Hinken, Executive Director of the Hertzfeld Foundation, Celeste Morgan, President and Executive Director of City Forward Collective, and Sarah Shaw, Deputy Research Director of the Wisconsin Public Policy Forum. Please welcome our first speaker, Dr. Brenda Cassellius.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
How are you? It's so fun to be around good friends. All right, I want to see where I go from this. There we go. I think I'm supposed to kind of set the stage for the discussion, and I don't know how I can do that in just 10 minutes, but I'm going to try to be really brief and hit it where it needs to be hit. And kind of let you know about where Milwaukee Public Schools is and where it stands. You know, I got here about a year ago, just about a year and a half, maybe almost a year ago, and we were facing a lead crisis. That put us in the hole about $43 million in our construction fund. And now we have just about 20 million left in that, and our age of our school buildings is about 85 years old. So on that side of it, that's our construction, our facility side, and lots of folks saying close some of those schools, right? On the other side is our operational fund, which then we were 3 years of audits behind, obviously not being clear-eyed about where this spending was happening, where revenues were coming in, and then that caused us to have overspending. And so we found that out January 13th of this year. And so facing that, then as I got here too, I found out we had a $75 million vacancy adjustment. Well, what that is really where we banked and budgeted for $75 million in savings for jobs we couldn't fill. Obviously, Milwaukee Public Schools serve 65,000 students. We have 11,000 employees in the district, and there's certainly going to be turnover, retirements, and that sort of thing, and you're going to have time when you don't fill vacancies. So what would be a more realistic vacancy adjustment? And that's really somewhere around 30 to 35 million. So what that other 40 million does is, if we do fill those positions, puts us in a very risky situation with our budget. And so that had to also be grappled with. We also saw 7,000 charter school students leave this past year, or this upcoming school year. And so when they leave, Milwaukee has, and maybe Sarah and Rob will talk about it, maybe Celeste will talk about it a little bit too. We still receive the revenue for those students, about 2/3 of it, and then we lose third each year for 3 years because they have a 3-year averaging. The same is true if we gain a student, we only get 1/3 of the funding, and then we get 2/3 the second year and 3/3 the third year. So the smoothing kind of happens, so you have to be really deliberate about your enrollment strategy moving forward and backward. So just wanted to kind of share with you some of those risks. We also had a 5-year forecast that showed that if we continue to give CPI and salary increases to our employees, we can expect to have about a $400 million deficit within the next 5 years. So, who wants my job? Just checking, because it's a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started on the major presentation, but I want to give you a little bit of that. So our goals really in NPS is to restore the fiscal health of the organization, fiscal stability, fiscal responsibility, fiscal efficiency, and really rebuild the trust with our community. Because I want to thank all of you for passing the referenda, because had you not, this would be a really dire situation for our children in Milwaukee. And so because you passed that, we were able to continue to keep art, music, and PE in our schools, and also keep ourselves buoyed during this really hard economic time that we have in the next 2 years. Also a strong focus on academic achievement, of course. I'll get into that just a little bit. And then also the number one thing I want to do is get the trust back from all of you. It was already said, about 91% of our students in grade 4 are not reading on grade level. A new study that just came out about 3 weeks ago from Stanford and Harvard showed that Milwaukee public school students scored 3.5 grade levels below their peers nationally. Black students, 4.5 grade levels below their peers nationally. It's completely unacceptable. And we have quite a job to do, not only digging out of the hole with our finances, but also digging out of the hole with making sure that our kids can read. Because if you can't read, you really have a very challenging time on how to learn anything else in school. And you have to do that in the earliest of childhood experiences and opportunities. And so big work to do on the academic side, which I'll get to in a little bit. Our graduation rates are rising. That's the good news. The bad news is we're still leaving 30% of the kids behind. That's not okay. And it needs to be remedied. And not only do we want to ensure that they're leaving us on time, but that they're leaving us when they actually can read and they're prepared to go on to post-secondary school or go into career military. As you can see, we also are experiencing, much like all the other urban school districts in the nation and some of our charter schools as well and others around, are seeing this enrollment decline. Birth rates are down. But the difference here in Milwaukee, I say, is that we actually have 60,000 students who don't choose Milwaukee public schools. Most of my colleagues across the nation don't have voucher schools. And so they don't have a natural population in which to compete. We do. And so if we actually do our jobs and we're getting kids reading and we're succeeding in our schools, our parents will choose our schools, and maybe the birth rate and the declining enrollment won't really affect us as much. And so we want to be good stewards of the public's trust. We want to make sure that we're offering an excellent education and that we're parents' first choice. So as we look at this demographic shift, we are anticipating about 336 students next year that will go down. That does not include the charter school count, where they're leaving us. And I think most of them going to the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee for their new sponsor. 58 schools we think are going to see declining enrollment, and then we have about 57 that are expected to grow. What we want to be able to do is build off our award-winning Montessori schools, our immersion school programs, our international baccalaureate programs, and some of our arts programs that are just really excellent, and make sure people know about that. And then we are going to be working on how do we get parents to come to schools that they're already choosing and expand across the city. One of those strategies is to lower class size. As you may have heard, I recommended to the board that we cut 264 positions that were in central office. All three of our audits, the HR audit, our academic audit, and our operation audit that the governor did, showed that central office was a bit too heavy. And it also showed that there weren't enough teachers in our classrooms and support staff to ensure that our children are able to actually learn how to read. And so we made the courageous decision, the board stuck with me, and I really appreciate their support, to do a transfer and to look at getting more resources into our classrooms, which is what we did. And so we lowered class size, especially at the earliest grade, and put a paraprofessional into these classrooms. So 1 to 18 at the grade 3, and 4 and 5, K3, K4, and 5. And that's the earliest you can get readers. And as you know, we're also not funded at K3. So the important thing is that when you're doing these, this is more of an enrollment kind of strategy, and also kind of a guarantee to try to get kids learning and socializing in the classroom and learning to read. And then grades 1 through 12 also coming down in class size. Some of our class sizes were at 35 to 40 students. As I go around and visit my schools, the teachers are just thrilled and say, oh my goodness, I'm so happy to have about 20 kids next year. I finally have a fighting chance. As you all know, this is the fiscal position of Milwaukee Public Schools. We're down about $3,400 per pupil since 2009 in terms of looking at being able to keep up with inflation. Just today, we announced some electric buses, about 150 of them. What does that have to do with anything I'm talking about with money? Well, just in the last 3 months, we've had to pay $800,000 more in fuel charges. So you can see the volatility of the economics of what we're dealing with in every single day, knowing where every single dollar is in Milwaukee Public Schools, so we can give it to our students as much as we can. So the major factors of our deficit were just overspending. Nutrition, transportation, we under budgeted for our debt service, and just some of our revenues were under budgeted as well, which that made us exceed the 46 million. And so, you know, there's just so many risks there. Of course, also the vacancy adjustment was a huge risk to the organization. And so now, you know, when we found out about it in January, we immediately put stop to our controls, put controls in place and put stops to our spending. All of our positions had to be reviewed. If it wasn't an essential position, we weren't hiring it any longer. We didn't participate in hiring LTE, which is limited term employment contracts. We were able to do a deep dive in our contracting. Actually found we had some encumbrances from 2004. So a big, huge job, over 225 hours of my contracting staff that went in and dug into all of our contracts. Still some contracts that we will be eliminating next year as well, but because it's a contract, we have to go through and wait for some of those things to stop doing, particularly on the assessment side, with over-assessing our students and renegotiating some of our transportation contracts, and then also looking at some of our food nutrition costs as well, and trying to get more reimbursable meals. Having good attendance would actually help with our meals, because if you prepare the meals and the kids aren't there, you have to pay for it. And so when you have such poor attendance, which is running around 85%, we have so much work to do, and all of it really ties back to our overall strategy with getting out of the hole financially. And so that's kind of where we are on the budget side of things. Just wanted to give you the rundown again. $45 million in lead in the hole, $46 million deficit, $75 million vacancy adjustment, which we're buying down to $35 million next year so that we're more in the area that we should be in, and $41 million increases in salary increases. So you can see how challenging it is for us, not only this year, but for the next year coming ahead. Certainly our employees will want to have additional salary increases in this economic challenging time and hardship for families. They'll certainly want to have a raise next year and the year after. And so we really do have to continue to look at our contracts, look at every single dollar in spending, look at how our schools are doing. But one of the things that the board has said is that we are going to continue to prioritize our classrooms and continue to prioritize giving services to our students. Some of the things on the future for us is looking at some HR strategies, working with our partners. I have 1 minute left. And putting in career pathways. As you know, we have 4 investment schools that we're working on in the 53206 neighborhood, going deeper in our literacy work, also supporting a reading commission, and then looking at making sure that we are fiscally responsible. This past state deal that was passed on by the state legislature that the governor did would have made a huge difference to Milwaukee, all Milwaukee schools and Milwaukee public schools, particularly with serving students with special needs. They could have easily provided the $300 million in relief to our public schools across the state of Wisconsin and done a lot of good for our students with disabilities. And I'm really sad that they didn't do that. It would have meant about $46 million to Milwaukee public schools to be able to serve our students with disabilities. And now without having that, that's just more of a financial strain on our school, on our charter schools, and all schools that receive public funding. So with that, I think I'll leave you, and thank you so much for being here today, and thank you to being such great partners. So many of you have been wonderfully supportive of me personally, and also of MPS and the really deep work we're doing to try to improve and make Milwaukee Public Schools something you can be proud of. So thank you.
I want to thank Dr. Cassellius for her leadership and transparency. Enjoy lunch, and we'll be back together in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon again, everybody. Rob Hinkin, the Executive Director of the Hertzfeld Foundation. Again, I'm joined by Sarah Shaw, the Deputy Research Director at the Wisconsin Policy Forum, and Celeste Morgan, who's the President and Executive Director of City Forward Collective. So we're gonna, those of you who know me know that we're gonna get a little wonky, not too wonky, but we want to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the specifics of MPS's 2027 budget. We have heard a very nice overview from the superintendent, and we're going to get Sarah and Celeste to weigh in a little bit. Give you a little bit more of a sense of the real tough choices that she and the district have had to make in this budget and what that portends for the future. So we all heard Superintendent Cassellius' presentation. It's easy to see based on her presentation, and for those of you who did have a chance to look at the Wisconsin Policy Forum budget brief, easy to see both the real progress that she has made in improving transparency, cleaning up several longstanding challenges. But at the same time, it's really just as easy to conclude that MPS's long-term financial challenges have grown even more daunting than ever. So I want to start by asking first Sarah, then Celeste, for their takes on the 2027 budget, both the impacts it will have on the coming school year, which starts on July 1st, and what it signals about the future. Sarah.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to the GMC for the invitation to be here with you all. I think in broad strokes, when we looked at the proposed budget for 2027, it was an overall story of number one, closing the budget deficit that had been found in the 2025 overspending, investing further over and above that with temporary buffers that exist in revenue for 2027 that are then going to dissipate. So 2027 works. And the question is what happens in the out years as cost pressures are going to increase for the district at the same time that revenues are far less certain. So that's the big question mark really weighing on not just this upcoming budget, but really what comes next.
So first, good afternoon. Thanks for having me as well. I'd say a couple of things. First, we shouldn't run past the 2027 works part of this. This has been, quite a few years coming where we have had huge questions about just can we rely on the numbers that the district is putting in front of us? For the first time, I think in 3 years, we've got clean audits, so we know that the numbers are right. They're daunting, but we at least know that they're correct. The district laid out a set of priorities. We can see clearly. I really appreciate how the superintendents are laid out. Here are the priorities. Here's how we built a budget against those priorities. Here's the tough choices that required. We can all sort of work through that process. It's even well presented on their website. So I want to start by giving a lot of credit for what had to be a lot of work inside the district to get to something that we have been waiting for some number of years. And I think Sarah speaks to the financial challenges that face the district in the coming years. I would also want to double underscore something that the superintendent also spoke to, which are the academic challenges, right? All of this is ultimately in service of our kids' learning, being able to read, to write, to do math, to be prepared for whatever is next for them in life. And we've got challenges, yes, at MPS, more broadly as a city, in terms of the outcomes that our students are producing. It's not an overstatement looking at the nation's report card, looking at the education recovery report that the superintendent referenced, to say that we are one of the most struggling urban districts in the country, one of the most struggling cities in the country. As it pertains to Black students in particular, it's actually a pretty inarguable case. And so getting the finances right, getting a good budget together matters, but it only matters insofar as we get to the much harder but ultimate goal of any school, which is to educate our kids. So that's where my thoughts come from.
So I want to probe a little more deeply into this sort of good news, bad news element. The 2027 budget, I think it's safe to say the most striking element is its ability to add not just a few, but literally hundreds of full-time equivalent teacher and paraprofessional positions. And so you may be wondering to yourself, well, how is that? I mean, we've been hearing for years that NPS is in severe fiscal distress. Is Superintendent Cassellius a magician? How is she able to add these positions? And there's a long answer to that question, but one of the short answers to it is that because of the loss of these charter schools that she discussed briefly in her presentation, that's going to be a long-term financial problem because of the declining enrollment. But because of the hold harmless position in the state funding formula, essentially MPS in 2027 is able to shed $40-something million of expenses associated with those charter schools, but its revenues barely get cut from the state. They do lose a little bit of revenue, net revenue from the charter schools. So, buoyed with that good news, I think Superintendent Cassellius did what most of us would have done in her position. She's intent on hiring teachers, lowering those class sizes, long-standing goals for MPS. So that's important. The bad news is, if all those teachers are hired, that sets MPS expenditures at a level that is not going to be sustainable unless something else big changes on the revenue side. And we know that actually the revenue picture is going to grow worse as those hold harmless positions or provisions disappear. So I've given you some brief background. I now want to turn it over to, we'll start with Celeste this time and then Sarah. I mean, it's a catch-22 for anybody to take the advantage you were given in this budget and hire a lot of people knowing full well that you're going to be in big trouble trying to keep them in the out years. Your thoughts first, Celeste.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts here. First, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, for lots of reasons, not just financially, having public charter school students leave the district, I don't think made financial sense. I don't think made academic sense. We've spent plenty of time on that. The board has spoken. The decision is made. It's not the opportunity to relitigate that. But I do think it's worth saying there are going to be consequences here that extend beyond the finances and extend beyond just this year. In terms of the investments being made, I think the superintendent pointed to the work that, I'm thinking of the governor's audit in particular, but there have been any number of audits that pointed to the size of central office and the opportunity to right-size that central office. I think time will tell if there's more work to be done there, but certainly it's been clear, not just in what happened over the course of this budget process. I think those were some of the first steps you took when you first came in last year as well. Reducing the number of people in central office to move more staff into classrooms makes almost too much sense, right? Like I say, we all get it, we all understand it. I do think that there are some challenges to face down the line. I know we'll talk as we go through the next 30 minutes about some of the other challenges that the district still needs to address long-term circumstances. But investing in teachers in the classroom, one, like clearly laid out as a priority. Two, It certainly makes sense. But, the last thing I would just say here is that we should also be clear, however, that more teachers doesn't necessarily translate to better outcomes for students without a lot of work in the middle. And so, while it's good to get more teachers in the classroom, I think it's a lot harder to do that work if you don't have good certified licensed teachers in classrooms. We also need to pay attention to all the other steps that need to happen to ensure that we get not just more bodies in front of kids, but actual real education happening that's delivering the outcomes that our kids deserve.
Sarah, your thoughts?
Yeah, the staffing piece feels like a necessary but insufficient condition. Being able to align priorities with what's actually in a budget, which often is not the case. We say that a budget is a reflection of priorities. It's actually not so frequent that you can see that on paper. And this budget does that. It says, we want to have a permanent licensed teacher in every classroom. Here's how we're going to get there. The issue is that with 70% of a budget, of a school district budget, of MPS's budget going towards staffing, you cannot get there without other staffing issues. And it means that in the out years, figuring out how to continue funding those positions becomes more and more of a structural issue, with healthcare costs going up every year, with like the need for CPI increases, in addition to any actual position increases you're bringing there. So I think the clarity of this strategy is admirable. The need to have the infrastructure to support it, so things like position controls, the unsexy stuff around operations, that the superintendent has been very forthright around saying these need to improve internally, that things like the governor's operational audit lifted up as in need of improvement. That's part of this, to make sure that we know what positions we have, we know what positions are filled, we know where there are still needs, and then constant monitoring to see whether the strategy is paying off. And this gets to the question saying about kind of that gap between bringing in people and then seeing what the impact is. Quality matters here, consistency matters here, and so this upfront investment puts a really clear stake in the ground for 2027 and beyond, and to continue it and beyond, knowing that it's going to have continuously increasing costs and requires a lot of attention to say, is this still the right strategy? What else does it need to make it bring the improvements that we've said that we want to see from it?
So just following up on that briefly, Celeste mentioned that part of the equation here too, and this is a trend that has been going on for years, is the move to try to cut positions from central services, also as a means of freeing up the resources to put more teachers in the classroom. I know the Wisconsin Policy Forum has, however, raised some concerns in the past about, well, what's that going to do to the district's ability to set and enforce good position controls and monitor its own finances and have a top-flight human resources operation that can actually fill those positions. And so I just want to ask, go to you, Sarah, what's your level of concern looking at those continued cuts in central services about the district's ability to really continue? I think one of the things that I know many of us have been so impressed with Dr. Cassellius are her efforts to professionalize MPS. What impact will this have?
So you could make the argument that some of the overspending that occurred in 2025 that came to light this past year was a result of, or at least an implication of, having cut central office. That the number of vacancies, the amount of turnover, the inability to really focus on that as an organizational priority. And certainly no one wants to see that happen again. So the question is, how do you maintain central office and the strengths that are in the process of being rebuilt while also positioning the classrooms to be the priority again? And it's hard for me to know from this vantage point what of that is about the what versus the how. So there's a matter of just straight numbers of how many staff do you have in place, and then there's the how are they doing their work, how well are they doing it, with how much duplication versus efficiency. And from what the superintendent has shared, it sounds like there's been a lot of room for just tightening processes. If you're tightening processes at the same time that you're losing staff, that gives you some decent wiggle room to be able to do more with less. The trick is keeping track of when is less just less. I think that's really a question for the district, the board, all of us to be keeping an eye on in the out years.
I don't know that I have much to add to that question. I would point in particular the governor's audit. I don't think what was being laid out there was this is a central office that needs more people to do the work that needs to be done. I think what was laid out there is this is a central office, or at least that was a central office at that point in time, that simply wasn't doing the work that needed to be done, regardless of the people in place, right? You know, it spoke to effectiveness, not necessarily, you know, quality of work, sorry, more so than the quantity of people to do the work. And I think that's been reflected in the decisions made today. And, you know, we're here talking about a better process and a better outcome and a more understandable budget on that reduced, you know, headcount. You know, I don't think more is always better. I think that's true as we talk about, you know, things that we need to talk about in terms of the classroom and school buildings, but I think that's also true in terms of central offices. What are we doing with the resources that we have? And it's clear that for a long time, we weren't doing what needed to be done.
So, Celeste, I want to stick with you. The superintendent mentioned the impact of the failure of the state legislature to approve the compromise package that had been agreed to by the governor and the two top Republican leaders that would have caused an influx of special education aid into the district. She said $46 million. Something that has perhaps been underplayed there is that this also would have put in tens of millions of dollars of additional state school aids would have come to MPS. Now, they wouldn't have necessarily been able to spend that money because the revenue limits wouldn't have changed, but there could have been an impact for property taxpayers. Your take on the failure of that package to go forward?
Yeah, so as it pertains to the K-12 provisions, I know there's been lots of conversation about other things that are included in that surplus deal, but I would say you're not going to find a lot of distance between any educator anywhere in the city and frankly the state on this. We have been underfunding special education for a very long time as a state. Those dollars would have helped kids. They would have helped kids at Milwaukee Public Schools. I think the superintendent spoke to that number. They would have directly helped students in public charter schools, and they would have helped students at private schools across our city too. This was one of those rare things, at least as it pertains to education, that was a win-win-win, which is why you didn't see anyone celebrating the downfall of this decision. You know, and you know, I've spoken to any number of public charter and private school leaders around the city, and to a person, they would tell you that they lament that that deal didn't pass because it would have provided additional resources for the students that they're serving, and because there's a shared recognition that wherever our students who have special education needs are being educated, those dollars need to be there. And this was a deal that would have delivered, maybe not all the way where we need to get it, but certainly would have moved us in the right direction.
Sarah, any comments from you on that?
Sure. First of all, the forum doesn't advocate one way or another for any deal that might have gone through, and we've noted that that deal would have weakened the state's fiscal position pretty substantially. For MPS in Milwaukee specifically, so there's the special education aid element of this, and then there's the potential property tax relief. So going on the 2024 bills, Milwaukee taxpayers had seen a 30% increase on their tax bills. In December of 2025, they saw a 3% increase. Slated to see another increase for December 2026 bills, and the $26 million more in general school aids that would have come through in this deal would have lowered that. Not by a terrifically substantial amount. We did a kind of back of the envelope calculation, and it would have been around $100 to $200 for the average, let me get my right, the median assessed home value, but not insubstantial when you think about those increases that have been coming through.
Let's take our lens out a bit into the entire K-12 education sector. We've talked about MPS exclusively. Obviously, as the superintendent acknowledged, nearly half of the kids in grades K through 12 in Milwaukee who are attending a Milwaukee school are doing so in a school that is not an MPS school. So we obviously have had a lot of controversy and contentiousness over the fact that we have been a laboratory for school choice here in Milwaukee, that we have 3 school sectors. I want to ask about both of you to comment on how MPS's fierce fiscal struggles impact the entire K-12 landscape in Milwaukee. So we know that MPS leaders are going to be asking the state once again for help in confronting budget challenges in 2028 and beyond. We know that those challenges are growing more daunting by the day. Let's start with you, Celeste. And Tell us about charter and choice schools in Milwaukee and how they're impacted by all of this.
You know, and I know we have to ask the question this way, and I know it's the way we've talked about it for a long time, but I think the thing that I'm hoping if we walk away from this conversation, and I think the surplus question you just asked is a good way to begin to think about it. We are one city with one set of students. We are now 30 years into this, plus, right? We are spending this time talking about MPS and the financial challenges there. They are real, they deserve our attention. All, any of us who are taxpayers or property taxpayers or educating students through Milwaukee Public Schools, that matters. And it matters to all of us, whether or not you have students in Milwaukee Public Schools. We need to care about that. And I would say we all need to care equally about the reality that the other half of students in our city are often being missed in this conversation because we all go to MPS first and sort of miss the other half of the conversation. There's still a $200 million in funding lost to the city of Milwaukee because students in public charter and private schools are funded at a different level than their peers at MPS. That's a conversation that we got to put on the table in the same way. When we talk about under-resourcing around K-12 education in Milwaukee, my organization recently did a report looking at the north side of Milwaukee and the challenges facing the 55,000 or so students there. The vast majority of them are Black. The absolute majority of Black students in the state are educated in that part of the city. Just 18% of them have access to high-quality schools, as we define high quality using the state report cards data. And that's not just an MPS problem. It is a citywide challenge. We were talking earlier about the Milwaukee Reading Coalition, the work of the Milwaukee Reading Coalition. That's a citywide challenge, right? The literacy crisis is not an MPS literacy crisis. It is a Milwaukee literacy crisis. The work we need to do to retrain our teachers is work we all need to do. That's not just MPS. And so I think the more we can find these spaces for us to all to get to the table together and address the challenges facing Milwaukee as a city, Milwaukee students as a group, as opposed to, continuing to allow ourselves to be divided and, let the rest of the state play divide and conquer over Milwaukee. It is in our collective interest, and I would say it's our collective imperative at this point in time, as we've reached this point where as many students are educated outside of MPS as inside of it.
Before I ask a follow-up, sir, did you want to comment on that question?
I think pointing out where in the state's funding formula, these fortunes are also linked. So when the revenue limit goes up statewide, that means that funding goes up for charter schools and for private choice programs. When categorically, like special education aid goes up, that also means an increase for our charter schools and for our private choice programs. So even baked into the funding mechanisms, as unnecessarily complex as they are, gets us to a place of seeing that interrelationship as much as the direct competition.
So it begs a question. I, for one, was very encouraged that the Milwaukee Reading Coalition was going to be a critical accomplishment, not only because of the impact it was going to have on literacy rates in the city of Milwaukee, but this was finally the moment when everybody was going to work in concert on a set of issues that were important to any kid in Milwaukee, regardless of the type of school that he or she attended. Are there other areas? What's the level of optimism that maybe we are reaching that point, Celeste, where we'll see this as one large system serving 100,000 kids instead of 3 distinct systems?
Are there other areas I can answer more cleanly? And the answer is yes. The superintendent spoke to one, attendance and absenteeism and the challenges of making sure our students are in school every day and learning is another space that comes to mind right away as an opportunity. Again, a challenge that we are not just facing inside of MPS, it's a challenge that schools across the city are facing, and they're taking different approaches to solving that. But imagine the collective power of us ensuring that every kid is in school every day. That's where learning begins. So that one comes to my mind right away as another area where we can work. In terms of my level of optimism, despite the politics of the moment, which can be very loud and very noisy, and unfortunately still feel like they're trailing the on-the-ground lived reality, especially of the parents, and caregivers who are making decisions for their kids every day. But you see collaboration amongst educators, you see increasing levels of coordination and communication, at the level of leaders across these various systems. Does it mean we're going to agree perfectly on everything? No, and we shouldn't. But it does mean that we should spend more time talking about the 80% of things that we all agree on and the shared challenges that our city faces Because frankly, sometimes we talk about this like there's some set of charter and choice families over here and district families over there. And that's not the reality, either at the level of an individual household. In many cases, frankly, we've stopped polling the question of where do you send your kids to school because so many people misidentify. Because they don't know, because they're not thinking, I'm only gonna send my kid to a public charter school, I'm only gonna send my kid to an MPS school. They're thinking, this is my child, what school is gonna give them the best opportunity for whatever that future is that I envision for them? And that's where I'm gonna send my child. Because they're thinking about their students first. I think it's time for all of us to follow our parents' lead in that regard.
Sarah, your comment?
I want to echo the chronic absenteeism and attendance issue. The most recent data that we have show that nearly 50%, nearly half of our MPS students are missing at least 10% of school days. It's a shocking number, and it should be shocking. And when we look at the data across the charter and the private choice programs, it's not quite at that level, but the growth in absenteeism in charters is actually higher than it was in MPS and has not come down by as much. So across the board, this is a Milwaukee student issue, that we have broken relationships between home and school. We have expectations as a community that we are not holding our children to in terms of coming to school, which, by the way, is a prerequisite for any other changes we want to see in the school system. The literacy work only works if kids are in school to benefit from it. So really taking this prerequisite of, are we as a community bringing all of our kids back to school and strengthening those relationships again, I think is such an opportunity, and in the meantime, such an albatross around our necks.
So we're gonna call Dr. Cassellius back up here in about 6 or 7 minutes so that she can have some last words on all of this. But before we do that, a couple more questions for you. I wanna go back to NPS, and we've talked about the challenges in the out years. We haven't yet talked about what can be done. We know one of the things obviously is MPS and choice and charter schools in Milwaukee could use more help from the state of Wisconsin. We've known that to be the case for a long, long time. Whether that happened given the state's own financial challenges is certainly still questionable. So let's say that doesn't happen. It would seem to me that the top 2 things that I've heard talked about are, number 1, we know that there's a study going on by the district, a process going on to look at school closures. I want to start with that topic because I think oftentimes that's sort of cited as a panacea. If MPS would only right-size its footprint, then all of its financial issues would be addressed. Let's start with you, Sarah. How do you see the school closure issue?
So first, I think there's both a financial argument for it and also an educational argument for it. When you have severely and chronically under-enrolled schools, you're just limited in what you can offer to kids there. I mean, trying to figure out how are they going to have clubs? How are they going to participate in athletics? Are they able to have access to AP and IB courses and other high rigor coursework that can truly prepare them for college and career? You just have less and less of that when you have less and less students in the building. And it makes for difficult efficiencies. Like you have a fixed number of staff that you need to be able to be in that building. You have fixed facilities costs. So from both a financial and an educational standpoint, it makes sense to be looking at school closures. It also can be just as expensive, if not more, in the short run as you're trying to make sure that it's going to be an investment into the receiving schools for students to be able to be welcomed into a place that is going to be a better fit for them, and it's extraordinarily painful for communities. And we have in Chicago is still reeling from school closures, and now we're looking at it a decade ago. So figuring out how to do it in a way that doesn't oversell what actually is benefited or what the actual gains are from those closures, and do it in a way that respects the history of communities and what they have lost and what they are hoping to gain. It makes for a very, very challenging position, and one where that's not where you want to put all of your, not all of your eggs should be going in that basket.
So, I mean, we've been pretty clear at City 4 Collective that we think it needs to happen, and we think it needs to happen at significant scale. You know, not the current facility study that's still underway, the one before indicated, I think it was $60 million was the number that it listed in annually recurring costs tied to vacant and underutilized space. And that, I think that was in 2017 or 2018 or 2019. This can has been kicked down the road here in Milwaukee for a decade plus. I think MPS's enrollment peak maybe was in the early or mid 2000s. I would agree with everything Sarah said. One of my jobs previously was a district administrator in New Orleans, and one of my jobs in that role was being responsible for going to communities and saying, this is a school, there it was primarily for academic performance reasons, but this is a school that's not going to continue to operate. Those are incredibly painful conversations. They're painful for every individual's family that is experiencing that dislocation. They're painful for communities. I don't want to run past any of that. We need to do that thoughtfully with sensitivity. I know the superintendent has said she needs to take the time to engage the community on that. I think it makes all the sense in the world, but it can be done. And there are other places that are doing this. I've pointed to Cleveland in particular, similarly sized city, similar multi-sector landscape. They're going through the process at the school district of, I think it's 39 schools across 29 campuses, if I'm remembering my numbers correctly, that they are closing. The other thing that I would say, and I've said this before, as with so many of these other issues, it's not just an NPS challenge, right? Getting to the right number of schools for the right students across our city is a citywide challenge. It's a conversation that we need to have across the board. And it's a conversation that you are seeing some of our public charter and private schools start to have. We have seen some closures. We have seen some consolidations and mergers happen across that landscape. If you're serving half the students, then, that means you got to take on half the responsibility. And that's not just the good stuff, but the more challenging side of this conversation as well, too. It's yet another place where I think we've got to be in this together as opposed to, allowing ourselves to go back into sector conversations.
And then the other question that has been talked about is whether Milwaukee Public Schools may need to once again ask the voters to exceed revenue limits and go to referendum again. I'd like you both to comment on the prospects of that happening, the prospects of the voters again saying yes. We can all prognosticate, but most importantly, the impact on property taxpayers.
I'm happy to try to take this one first. I think we're making progress. I would say the polling is pretty clear. We're not there yet. We're not particularly close to being there yet. When we ask this question, we find maybe 40%, low 40% support for another referendum. And that's before you start putting details around that. The rule of thumb is that those numbers usually drop by another 5 to 10 percentage points when you actually are able to say this is how much it's going to impact you. The financial challenges facing the district are real. I think, when we've asked sort of straight up, would you rather see school closures and consolidations or additional property tax increases? 66 to 11 in favor of school closures and consolidations. These are tough conversations either way, but I would say, at least from our polling and our work in the field, there's a pretty clear priority. And you see it more broadly, right? The pain people are feeling around property taxes. It's not just a Milwaukee conversation, it's a statewide conversation. And I think there's some recent research talking about housing affordability here in Milwaukee in particular being amongst the worst in the country, or certainly in the region. There are lots of reasons, both push and pull, why I don't think we're there yet for that conversation, even though I understand the need for additional resourcing as part of the solution set at Milwaukee Public Schools.
Sarah, I know this is a tough question for you to weigh in on, given the nonpartisan nature of the policy forum, but anything to say?
I think just to say we're not even sure what the referendum would be for. There's equal reason right now to be anticipating an operational referendum and a capital referendum, because we know that the ongoing operational costs of the district are likely to continue increasing, even as cost pressures and revenue might be decreasing. And we've been talking about the facilities question here. The lead stabilization diverted a lot of funds that the district had set aside to be able to do exactly the kind of work that the long-range capital plan would have laid out to do. So rebuilding that fund and then going through all the process of actually dealing with these old buildings that need work that probably should not all be in use at the moment. There's a world in which we're looking at 2 referenda on the horizon and figuring out what the parameters there would be, what the voter appetite is, what the impact on property taxpayers would be, but also ultimately what the alternative is. If not these, then what?
And I think it makes it all the more appropriate that the GMC is creating an infrastructure committee, because really the NPS infrastructure question has flown somewhat under the radar screen. We're talking about closing lots of schools, which many people think is both necessary and appropriate, but there is such a need for investment into the schools that are going to stay, and that's a big challenge that Superintendent Cassellius has inherited, and there's seemingly no way out. Combine that with the $1 billion+ infrastructure backlog at Milwaukee County, Combine that with MMSD wanting to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in flood control measures, and we have an infrastructure problem in this community. So Mr. Radke and Mr. Kissinger, we look forward to your solutions. We'll hope to see them within the next month or two.
And Rob, before we leave this, can I say one other thing that I should have said before? I know this conversation, you asked a question to ones of Milwaukee. We should be clear, we're not the only district, far from the only district that is facing this. Like, you know, I don't know how we get to a conversation around finance and education and not just point to the fact that, like, we are living under a state funding formula that is badly broken. It is broken in some particular ways for us here in Milwaukee, given our unique setup, given our different needs and tax base, but it is broken across the state. It's been overdue for a decade or more now for us to revisit and fix this. We have to have that conversation, and I think that's got to be one that's not just about Milwaukee. That's got to be a conversation about the entire state.
Thank you. So let's have a round of applause for our presenters. I think you can tell we could spend all afternoon up here talking about these issues, but let's now turn it over to our superintendent.
Okay, where do I start? Let's start with the referendum. I think that the mill rate that was promised in the 24 referendum was 10.10, correct me if I'm wrong, 10.10%, and we're at 9.86. So we are below what even the voters had done. So that's fiscal responsibility right there. In terms of our website, I think you should go to our website. I just want to make sure we did a really extensive job of transparency. I think that when I was meeting with Celestin, he said, I don't even think I have to write anything this year because you have it right on your website. So we have a very extensive FAQ there too. So read that, please. It's really informative. Just want to make sure you know that that's there for you to go and learn more. When we talk about where's the money going to come for the class size reduction, I just want to make sure that folks know that we cut central office positions, which are often more expensive than your first year, second year, third year teacher positions, because they're experienced teachers in those positions or they're administrators. And so we saved quite a bit of money, about $25 million. With the addition of the 150 teachers we were able to put out into the classroom, that cost us about 150 teachers cost us about $25 million. And then we made about $30 million worth of cuts with those 264 positions. So that's what we were counting on for ongoing costs of those teachers. Other costs that we are going to be looking at is healthcare and trying to make some savings on healthcare. Of course, we have the additional dollars coming in on the per pupil at about $400 per student at about $26 million. We also plan on continuing to cut contracts, about $15 million. Transportation savings, about $8 million. We have a study coming this next week. It's going to talk about our transportation savings. It doesn't come without pain with the transportation. $5 million we hope to get with increasing the cost of high-cost special ed. There was a change in the legislature about a year ago that said that if you can reimburse any costs over $30,000, and of course Milwaukee Public Schools serve some of the most complex needs for students, some medically fragile, and any costs that are over $30,000, you can get 90% reimbursement. We have been leaving that money on the table, so we are going to be hiring 2 people to help us reimburse those costs as well. And then we've been standing up those underutilized schools at about $15 million a year. And if we can close and merge schools, then we don't have to spend the $15 million in extra staffing for those schools, so they do have quality programming. And we can gain those teachers as well. So know that there's a plan, and we are judicious. And then, of course, as we look at that funding that we're planning to save, or through efficiencies or greater controls, we also still just balanced a budget on zero. So we have $500,000 in our reserve. I about hit the floor when I learned that when I first came into the district. Like, what do you mean 500,000? You know, you should have about 5% set aside at minimum. And so we're looking at, we want to get at least $100 million saved so that we have a rainy day fund. And so any little bit that comes in is going to protect class size first. It's going to invest in our teachers. We're going to continue to find more efficiencies so that we can continue to prioritize students in our budgets. And we also are going to implement our controls and monitor our controls monthly and make sure that we're reporting that out transparently to the board. We're going to make sure that any contracts that we're doing, we're pre-auditing our contracts to make sure that those contracts are prudent and we're getting our best price on that. So that will control our spending. We're controlling the spending at the schools. There used to be overruns and salary expenses. That's been taken care of. And then, of course, as we continue to be judicious, we have to continue to build that reserve. Let's see, what else did you talk about? Enrollment is, yes, we have to grow that carefully, but I think we will grow in enrollment. I think we have declining rates that happen, and what we want to do is stave off the declining. And we definitely want to match the loss that we're going to have with the 40 million in charter resources, so we need to gain that amount back every year. So we have some pretty significant marketing that we're going to be doing and investments in our, particularly at our high schools where applications are up around career pathways. This is where all of you can come in and help at businesses for internships, apprenticeships, and programming to help with that. We're finishing up our portrait of a graduate. I'm really excited about that work as we look at the skills that our students need for today. So I think that pretty much sums up my response and things. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that you all covered that I needed to just either clarify or accentuate. I think the final thing is that, yeah, it is a bit of a gambit that Sarah wrote in her policy to do class size reduction, but I'd rather invest in this new generation of children and give them 3 years of a boost than have them continue to fail in the status quo. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Education remains one of the most important pillars in determining the success and stability of an individual's life. And as business and civic leaders, it's critical that we understand the interconnected role education plays in shaping Milwaukee's future and engage in thoughtful dialogue and sustainable solutions that support student success and regional prosperity. Thanks to all of our speakers today. Thanks to our gracious host, Dean Andrew DeGuire and Marquette University. Next meeting is scheduled for September 14th, so you've got 90 days off to enjoy the summer. So have a great, safe, and fun summer. This meeting is adjourned.